Boy, I looked at my hair and I was just like, what's going on here? Okay, so got a thumbs up. Okay, good. Thumbs up. I'm going to wait a minute since we're a little early and see who else shows up. Can I tell who's here? Gianna, are you here? Maybe not. Okay, I'm just going to wait a minute. Get some, there we go. Gianna's here. So is it just, okay, so it's how is it possible for there to be three of us, but only you and me? So there is someone else here. That's great. Okay, so we're going to wait just a minute. Get started. But you know, I'm not going to wait that minute because time is valuable. I only have 45 minutes to do this. And so I'm going to get started because I imagine we're recording this, and if someone else wants to look it over, they can. So, we're going to talk a little bit about, and if I look like I'm looking down, and it's because I am, because I'm reading what I'm supposed to be talking about. I'm not reading exactly what I'm supposed to say, but it's a very good idea whenever I'm speaking to have an agenda. And so I've been given an agenda, so I'm looking down and I'm trying to read it. So first thing first, welcome back. Welcome back. I wanted to talk a little bit, very briefly, only for about 5 minutes, what we talked about last time, which was a lot of it had to do with communication, making sure that when you submit your resume, that the things that are any concerns that are on your resume are somehow communicated to the people who are reviewing your resume. It's really important. You can't automatically assume that they're going to know the hardships that you went through, the difficulties that you went through, the reasons why maybe you were at a job for 5 years in the same position. They're going to assume, because this is easy for them, they're going to assume that, hey, maybe this person was just a little bit lazy. Maybe they were a little bit unmotivated. And so you have to, if you're given the opportunity, you have to tell them why. I'm going to use myself as an example. So when I was working at BCG in the recruiting department, I was there for 16 years. First 8 years, I was an assistant. 8 years as an assistant. And you'd look at that and say, this guy's not motivated at all. I mean, but then you look at my after that, I was promoted to recruiting coordinator. So there's a position that's in between the two. There's a position called a recruiting associate. It's a really bad position to have. It's where you are suddenly on salary, and also you're getting paid less than you would normally get paid as an hourly employee, which you are as an assistant. I specifically asked to stay on as an assistant because I did not want that position, because I could not move up to a coordinator because my boss was a coordinator and you couldn't have two coordinators in the office. So there's a lot of explanation as to why I was a recruiting assistant for so long. But when someone looks at my resume, they're not going to know that. And so if I did have an opportunity to write a cover letter or speak to someone, it would be a really good idea to actually mention that. I wouldn't say if I'm meeting for 30 minutes to talk 30 minutes about it, but maybe just have known to identify this might become an issue. And so bring it up, let them know. And so now they know. So then they can't, because when people don't know stuff, they invent things in their head. And they probably will think of some fantastic things. And a lot of times it'll probably be a negative thing, which is he's lazy, right? So we talked about that, trying to communicate any deficiencies you have and letting them know exactly why these things happened. Because the more they know, the more informed they can be, and the more willing they are to move you forward, because eventually they will have to talk to someone who's in charge of the office, and the person in charge of the office is going to ask the same exact questions that I'm asking as a recruiter, and I want to have an answer for them. And if I don't have an answer for them, there's no way you're going to move in front of that person. Okay, so that's kind of like what we talked about. But today what we're going to talk about is we're going to break down the main reasons why you wouldn't be considered as an applicant when it comes to the resume. Ruben is asking what session this was covered in. There's a session that was 2 weeks ago. That's the session that was covered. Now, okay, so now we're going to talk about the resume. Now, there isn't anything specifically that you would say when you submit your resume, hey, this guy is an automatic no. Because in your resume, you're just kind of like submitting, you're saying like, hey, I like the job. If you're submitting a cover letter and you're saying, hey, I'm dear McKinsey and I'm working at BCG, then it's just kind of like, yeah, lack of attention to detail. So there's a reason not to move you forward because you obviously have more of an interest in McKinsey than you do with us. And so that's kind of like an automatic no, although they could be nice about it and realize that, hey, you know what, we know what you're doing. We all understand that everyone's copying and pasting everything all over the place. But this is an opportunity for you to show the fact that you can be very precise and very detail oriented. Now, as far as the actual resume goes, let's talk about the resume. The resume we're looking for is a consulting resume, and I think that consulting resumes are a little bit different than your typical resume because what they're looking for is they're looking for results. And the best way that at MCO, the way that we look at it is putting all your experiences, all your bullet points into the XYZ format. Now that is X being like what you did, which could be like increased profits or reduced costs or increased efficiency. Okay. And then we want to quantify that. That's the Y, XYZ, right? So then we want to quantify that. That's the Y. Now you have to understand that there's a great power in numbers. And if I was talking to Gianna's here. And if I said, hey, Gianna, I lost weight, she would say like, hey, great, Bruce, because she's being nice. But if I said, no, Gianna, you don't seem to understand. I lost 100 pounds. Then all of a sudden, Gianna's like, hey, tell me more, right? She wants to know more because the result is so impressive. And so if we put that right up front and say increase profits 50%, people will be curious and they'll want to know exactly what you did in order to achieve that goal. Now, when we go to the Z part is explaining exactly why or how you did that. Okay. Now, quite often when people are putting this together, they have a lot of difficulty coming up with that number. They also have difficulty with explaining exactly what they did. And then also they have a problem with coming up with their impact because they're just like, I was hired at the cash register and my job was to just like do exchanges. You come in, you give me money, I give you your product, and that's it. So what we want to do is what you want to do in your resume is you want to go a little bit deeper. And one of the things that I think a lot of people make mistakes in is they don't realize that they are doing things that are consultant-like. And what is consultant-like? Well, look at what consultants do. If we're working at a coffee shop and we're making coffee and we hire a bunch of consultants, we don't hire the consultants so they can make coffee too. Instead, we hire the consultants so that they can look over things, they can look around, and they can say, okay, this is how you can become more efficient. You want to rearrange this, you want to make a line up, trade a new line, you want to take orders early, you want to do all this stuff, right? This is what they're doing. They're doing higher level stuff. And that's what we want to demonstrate. We want to demonstrate moments when we've done things like that. Okay. And you're thinking like, but I'm the guy at the cash register. But there's moments in all of our lives where we just usually out of frustration, we went above and beyond. And we decided that, hey, you know what? This is really frustrating and I'm going to do something about it. And I want to give an example of that. For example, and I may have used this example before, but I'm going to use it again. I was helping I know someone, and he was working as a football coach, right? And a football coach, they always come out with these big pamphlets or these big books, playbooks. They have everything in them. And it's really frustrating. It's really time consuming. Every year we have to do this thing. And there's all the players, there's all the coaches. It's just like there's hundreds of these things that they have to print out. And he says, it's just a pain in the butt. And so in order to make it easier for him, he suggested, hey, maybe we can digitize this. And it would be easier to distribute, et cetera, et cetera. And they said, okay. And he says, like, great, that's fantastic. And the reason why he did it was because it's easier for him. It's easier for him to do. But when we put it on his resume, it's not going to say, hey, I did this because it's easier for me. Instead, he's going to talk about the amount of money that he saved from the printing costs, the labor costs that it took to put this together, the efficiency of the amount of time less that it took to put this stuff together. These are the things that he's talking about. So those are the numbers he's coming up with. So now he can say he can pretty much choose what he wants to do. Reduce cost of producing playbooks by this much, or you can either get a percentage or an actual amount by doing this, this, and this, right? By turning it from traditional paper to a digitized form. And that's it. That wasn't necessarily his job. That wasn't what they hired him to do. But this was something, it was just a moment when he stepped out and said, man, this is really inefficient. How can I make things better? And we all have moments like this. Now, if you're working at a consulting firm, the way things work at a consulting firm is a partner goes to a client tells them what the problem is. This is the problem that we're experiencing. And then the partner takes that information and then it goes back to his team. And then with his team, he says, this is the problem. They put it up all on the board and they talk it through. And the partners say, usually in about 30 minutes, maybe an hour max, they know what the solution is. But now what they have to do is they have to take that information and then they have to go and look at every possible scenario. And this is how BCG is making its money. It's looking at every possible scenario. So they're going down every rabbit hole to make sure that this is actually the solution. Now, what if they don't do that? Well, then when they're speaking with the client could say, hey, did you look at this thing? And is BCG going to say, no, we didn't bother to look at that because that's not it. No, they have to say, yes, we looked at everything. That's how they're making their money. And so for 3 months, they look at everything, right? And then they come back and they probably say at that point, yes, we agree that this is the solution. This is what you should follow. Now, as an individual, you don't have time to do that. You don't have the luxury of doing something like that. You just have a few minutes. And just because you think of something in a few minutes doesn't mean it's not valuable. And it doesn't mean that it can make the company a lot of money. So don't think that just because your ideas are small or quick, that doesn't mean that they're not worth putting down on your resume. Because I think the instinct is when you're putting down your resume, you're going to put down things like if you're a receptionist somewhere, you're probably going to put down, answered phones and greeted customers. But instead, you want to look at, well, what was my impact of answering phones and greeting customers? Did I somehow make something more efficient? Did I answer the phones more? Well, it's hard. Some positions are hard, but did I? But as you're sitting there, you probably noticed that there was maybe a frustrating area that time when people took more time to greet the customer, and they were sitting there longer. And you may have created a process so that maybe you were notified that they were arriving downstairs. And so then you notified the person that was going to meet them so that they could meet earlier than having them sit there for 20 minutes. So you have to think about those things. And then that's something that you can put in your resume, that you reduce the amount of wait time by 90% by devising a scheme to locate customers early in the lobby, as opposed to waiting for them to get up to the floor. Something along those lines. So think about those things. Now, if you don't have those impressive things to put in your resume, now this is what we're looking for. We're always looking for impact. I had one resume that I was helping somebody with, and his resume was very tasky, and it had stuff that had he was working at a hospital, and he was doing things that were very much, just filing things and putting stuff away and all that stuff. And then at one point he had written down that one of the things that he did was he rearranged the stockroom. It's like, okay, wait a second, we might be able to build on this. What exactly did you do with the stockroom? And he said, well, I rearranged it, and I just kind of cleaned it up, put things in order. Okay, well, why did you do that? We have to think about everything that we do this way. Why are we doing it? There must be a bigger reason. They're not just trying to keep you busy, because if they were just trying to keep you busy, you probably don't belong there, and they probably don't really need you to work there. But instead, you're doing things for a reason, right? You're doing things to make things more efficient or to save the company money. So in this case, if you rearrange the stockroom, people can probably access the stockroom and spend less time in there and get their stuff quicker. Okay, so now let's build on that. How much quicker can they get it? Well, that's really hard because there was no one there timing them. Okay, so but when you went in there, how long did it take you to normally get something? Well, it usually takes, because everything's disorganized, it usually takes about 10 minutes. Okay, now how long does it take now? Well, now it takes 3 minutes. Okay, so we can say reduce the amount of time, reduce the search time in storeroom by 70% by doing this, this, and this, right? So now all of a sudden we've invented a number. We came up with a number. Now you have to, when you do come up with a number, you have to have a formula behind it, because what if you are questioned later on? You have to be able to say like, hey, and here's my formula. This is what I came up with. Okay, this is how I came up with that number. So impact, impact, impact. Now, a lot of times what people do also, because now we have the X. X is easy, like what I did. What was the result of what I did? Increased revenue. Now we have a number. We're trying to come up with a number. We have the number. Some numbers are really easy to come up with because we can look at it and factually the profits increased. Factually, efficiency or accuracy went from 0% to 100%. These are factual things. Sometimes, though, you can say customer satisfaction increased by 50%. I would want to know exactly what you did or how you track that, because the only way we can see that customer satisfaction increased was if you did have maybe a survey that was done. So sometimes you have to say exactly how you came up with that number, or how you can justify that increase in customer satisfaction. But some things, other things, they aren't necessary because they're very much concrete, factual stuff. Okay, so now we have the number. We have the number, and then we have how you did it. Now, this is where a lot of people get very, very confused, because they'll say by devising a strategy. They'll want to get the word strategy in because this is a strategy consulting firm, strategic management consulting firm, right? This strategy. So I want to get the word strategy in there. But strategy doesn't really tell us much because it's so vague. When I first started working at BCG, I had no idea what BCG was. And then I thought one day, it's like, hey, you know what? I have some time. I'm going to figure out what BCG does. So then I went to the webpage and I looked it over, and I was just like, I have no idea what BCG does, because they pretty much have it. There's nothing that just says this is what we do. Instead, they talk about all their projects. And it was very confusing because they had a lot of different projects. And that's the reason why it's confusing when you put strategy, because strategy can mean so many different things. So what you want to do is you want to give us the information that's behind the word strategy. So what are the details of the strategy? So for example, if I said I created a backyard strategy to make my backyard more pleasant, that wouldn't really tell you anything. You're just like, what does that mean? I mean, we know it has to do with the backyard, but I don't know exactly what that means. But if you supply details will show the skills that you have, and it will also show the exposure you have to certain industries or certain techniques and things like that. So for example, now, if I created a backyard strategy, which included an irrigation system and a planting schedule, which increased the pleasantness of my backyard by 50%, then now I know you know about irrigation systems, and also that you know about planting or like growing stuff. And I also know that it legitimately happened because the fact that it increased your happiness by 50% in the backyard. Now, how did I come up with 50% happiness? Well, I used to go out there 1 hour a day. Now I go out there an hour and a half a day. That's how I came up with that number. But so you want to avoid vague words. Like a lot of people, if you look at their bullet points, you could pretty much take that bullet point, copy it, and paste it on anyone's resume because it's so vague. Increase profits by analyzing this, and by analyzing numbers and coming up with solutions. It tells me nothing. What are the solutions? Tell me the solutions. And when you're analyzing things, what insights did you come up with, right? Tell me what you came up with when you analyze stuff. Identify this and identify that. which led me to create a solution that involved doing this and this. So details matter quite a bit because details show skills. And also when you're looking at a resume, you want your resume to be interesting, and the resumes become a lot more interesting with the more details that you provide. So if you did say that I was working with international, a bunch of different countries to um, to do this project, would it be more interesting if you actually named off some of the countries? Because every time you name off one of the countries, that shows you exposure to that country, right? So now all of a sudden you're sounding like a very international person. So you want to also take advantage of those things. So you want to know vagueness, details, number, and then also your impact. And so you all want to put that into the XYZ format. Now, a lot of things that a lot of people have problems because everything is very tasky. I analyzed data. I answered phones. I rearranged stockroom. But if you can think about what was the end result of you doing that, how did it make the company better? Then that's going to make your resume so much more standoutish than everyone else's resume. Okay, so that's one of the things that you definitely want to do. Are there any questions? I know only Ruben's here, such as like Ruben and Gianna. But Ruben, if you have a question, but not necessarily, because I just wanted to get a drink of water. Now, if you're an undergrad, you're going to be saying, or if you're a research scientist, or if you're somebody who's working in a, say you legitimately don't know what your impact is, because maybe you're a research scientist. And you try to think about, hey, you know what? I tried to look into it. Like I had frustration because the lab wasn't getting me supplies on time. And so I tried to rearrange it so that the lab could come to me earlier, that type of stuff. So I tried to work on internal stuff. So I have a few of those bullet points. But when it comes down to my research, I don't really have a number. I don't have an impactful number because I don't know, because we won't know for 20 years whether or not we solve cancer, and solve the problem of cancer. It's like, okay, so let's think about other numbers that we can put in. As I mentioned before, if I said I lost 100 pounds, numbers mean something, right? And so, but in this case, what we're going to do is we're going to try to impress with other numbers. Now, let's go back to the receptionist idea. If I'm a receptionist at a place like BCG, let me impress with other numbers. And so I'm going to say, instead of saying I answered the phone and also greeted customers, let me actually calculate how many people did I answer the phone. So actually, I answered 4,000 calls a day. Answered 4,000 calls a day and greeted 500 customers within the office. Okay. So now I'm impressing with those numbers. And now all of a sudden it's just like, wow, 10,000 phone calls a day. So now you can put numbers in. Now it's not as impactful as when you actually do something and have an impact. But it does give you a better idea of how busy it was when you're there. And in reality, BCG, they barely get like 20 phone calls a day, just so you know. But that's something that you can do. So, for example, if you're working on a disease and trying to cure a disease, you could always say, I'm working on this disease, which affects 5 billion people in the world. Or maybe there's more than, I don't know if there's more than 5 billion people. But you can say that, which affects the population of the United States, which is 320 million people, by doing this, this, and this. So now all of a sudden you have given a number to it, and you showed how important this is. They wouldn't assign you this project. You wouldn't be important if this number wasn't so big, right? They're giving you a really important project because this affects 320 million people, right? I worked with a pharmaceutical company, and you could say like, hey, that's great, but if you say no, a $327 billion pharmaceutical company, so you can always put numbers in that just show that that impress people. Like if I said that I worked at BCG that'd be, or if I worked at a consulting firm, you'd be like, oh, great, Bruce, you worked at a consulting firm. But then if I said, no, I worked at a $12 billion a year consulting firm, then all of a sudden it's like, oh, well, wow, you must have been important. It's like, well, I wasn't, but it does make it seem like I'm an important person because it was a very successful place to be, right? So you can always try to put in numbers elsewhere, but I would say only put those numbers. You can try to put those numbers in your already impactful numbers, or already in your impactful bullet point. But if your bullet point has absolutely nothing in it, you can try to impress with those numbers and try to get numbers in somehow. Whenever I'm looking at someone's resume, I always look at it and say, like, okay, if you worked on a team, first question, how many people? How many people were on the team? Because it shows like collaboration, how many people you've worked with. Led a team, how many people did you work with? So always try to find numbers. I improved process. Okay, how much? You can't put the word improved without giving me a number. Okay, so let me see. Ruben is saying, very helpful. Aside from core bullet points related to job responsibilities and projects, should one include employer recognition awards? If so, where in the resume? Now, there is a section. I would say there's a section at the very bottom. It's called additional. I would call it additional. And additional is where you can put down certificates. You can put down. I would say scholarships would probably go like right underneath your education. But you could put down certificates down there. You can put recognition. You can put awards. You can put interests. You can put skills. You can put, additional. What's nice about it is going to be a little bit flexible down there. But additional, and then put a bullet, put something and say interests. Put down your interests. Awards. Put down your awards. Certifications. Put down that. Also put down languages, and then put down that as well. So that's a section where it's kind of like a miscellaneous area. Now, what a lot of people don't do, which is really weird, especially those people who are not MBAs, they don't put down an interest section. And an interest section is always nice because it shows that you have other interests besides just business, business and work. So it's a nice area for you to put down, show something where you can bond a little bit. So you can put down things like, hey, I'm a big Lakers fan. Lakers. After Kobe left, it's just like, nah, forget it. But anyway, you can put basketball, and then in parentheses put Lakers, and then, or you can put traveling, and then in parentheses you can put 32 countries, or books, like one book a day for 3 years, that type of thing. But it gives an opportunity to show that you have other interests. And it does work because people do read that. I remember that I was helping a client, and he was trying to get in touch with someone in the San Diego office. Lakers, yeah. After Kobe left, I was just like, I can't follow him. But when we look at, we sent a resume to the guy in charge of the office because we were trying to find the recruiter. It was really difficult to find the recruiter in the San Diego office of BCG. So we sent it to the guy in charge, and San Diego, and he gave it back to us, or he sent an email back to the candidate I was advising, and he said, oh, I'm going to forward this to the recruiter. So it's just like, okay, now we at least got what we wanted. We wanted the recruiter, and now we got it. And then he made the comment. He says, wow, 412 pounds. That's impressive. And what he was talking about there was that in the very bottom where it says interests, one of the interests was weightlifting. And he said, like deadlift, 412 pounds. And so the partner had bothered to read that, so he looked down, he glanced at everything else, but he looked down at that part. And he did read that part, and he actually mentioned something in that part. So it is very important to have an interest section. If you look at all the MBAs do have that on their resume. And you think that MBAs would be the most, tight-knit group of people and ties and all that other stuff. But this is something that they have in their resumes. And yet we have people who are undergrads, who are PhDs, who do not have that. And so I would say include that as well. Okay. So we have that. Let me look at my agenda and make sure I'm on track. I think I'm on track. No, actually, I can talk about the resume for 15 minutes more. Okay. So Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about the resume. Now when you're an undergrad, or even when you're a PhD, one of the reasons why the extracurriculars is so important is because you don't have that you don't have a lot of impact in your work. Maybe you were just given very tasky things. Maybe you worked at a coffee shop. Maybe you're working in the lab. And so that's why extracurriculars are so important, because when you do extracurriculars, that's usually nonprofit or that's usually a smaller organization, and you can have a lot of impact really quick. And so that's why it's so nice to have that section, because you can say that you raised this much money for this organization, or you can say that you raised or that you increased the number of attendees for this function, or something along those lines. So it is important to have that section as well. Sometimes you'll be like, oh, if I have publications, I need to list every single publication I ever did. With PhDs, quite often we get like, oh, they have their resumes really long. Don't necessarily need that unless you worked with someone who is going to really be impressive, and that's someone who is well known by everyone. And a lot of times, what that means is that that 7 pages of all the research you've done just pretty much comes down to just maybe like one or two. And if you really want to include that, you can somewhere. Sometimes people have projects that they want to include. Um, that just depends on space. Now, what you really want to do is you want to keep the resume down to 1 page. Now, why 1 page? It's just because back in the day, it was because we would sometimes lose the second page, and then all of a sudden it seemed like your resume was, this is incomplete. Whereas it just seems to kind of stop. The second page was somewhere else. That's why. That was what really the reason why. But if you look at consultants are very concise people. I was shocked when I started working at BCG, because I thought, man, they're doing so much research. Look at all the research they're doing. They have piles and piles and piles of data, and they're giving all this stuff to the client, and they're saying, like, this is what you should do. It's like, no, that's not what they're doing. What they're doing is they're taking all that information and they're narrowing it down into a 20-page deck. And in this 20-page deck is everything you need to do. Now that's pretty impressive that they're able to take all those ideas and put them in 20 pages. And if you look at a BCG slide, it's very, very basic, because what they have is they've taken that excuse me, information, and they made it and they put it into something that's very concise. And this is all you need to know, right? And so that's what you're doing. You're kind of demonstrating that skill when you're showing your resume. You're showing that you have an ability to make things very, very concise and put them into like get it down into 1 page. People that I've helped recently, one person got into McKinsey. He had 20 years of work experience. I mean, if anyone is allowed like a 2-page or 3-page resume, it should be him. But we looked it over and we got him down to 1 page. Now, keep in mind that resumes are not designed to have everything that you did. Resumes just need to hold the stuff that you're proud of, that you can speak well of. And also, you need to account for your time. If you have if you worked at a company for 5 years and you left school and you worked at a company for 5 years and then you had a job for a year, you may need to include that 5-year job, because you have to account for your time. But if you're at 4-year college and you have a job that's here in the middle of the 4-year college, it's not really necessary to post, because you were in school, so your time's accounted for. So you don't necessarily need to put that job. Internships you should put, especially if you're like straight out of school or still in school. But if you look at my resume, I've been working for a long time. I changed my title from experience or relevant experience to relevant experience. And so I don't have to include, if I'm applying for a recruiting position, I don't have to include anything that is non-recruiting related, because you're talking about a bunch of really random jobs. Absolutely mean nothing to anybody, right? But let me just include the stuff that has to do with recruiting. That's if I'm applying for a recruiting position. What is the rule of thumb on the extent of prior years that the resume should cover? Now, if you are straight up, some of it has to do with just how much space you have, right? Now we're trying to keep down to that one page. If you have something that's really insignificant, if it was maybe like 6 months, and if it was 5 years ago, and if it had nothing to do with what you're applying for, I don't think anyone's going to miss that. But if it's something that, so I would say it depends. But I would say if you feel comfortable seeing it off your resume, um, if it doesn't really add any value to your resume, then I can see it as something that you could remove. Now, it depends a lot on how far you are out of school. If you're out of school for 10 years, you probably don't have to report those things that when you were directly out of school. Probably not necessary at this point. So I would say that I would get rid of the stuff. You can probably start shaving off. Now here's something that you could do. Most recent experiences, you can have maybe like 3 bullet points. As you go to experiences that are further away, you can probably start narrowing it down to the more relevant experiences. And so that experience from 5 years ago, that could only have 1 bullet point. And that 1 bullet point would kind of give it a very good idea of what you did there. So bullet points you can have fewer and fewer bullet points as things get further and further away. So I would do that first. And then at some point, if I see that it's just that there's absolutely no reason for this was so far long ago, it has absolutely nothing to do with what I was doing, then you can get rid of it. Now, let's take a look at my girlfriend's resume. I'm not going to look at it, but I'm just going to talk about it. She was working at JP Morgan. She left JP Morgan to go, be a caregiver for her mom. She did that for like a year, maybe 2 years, and then she started working at a mortgage company for maybe 6 months, 8 months, maybe a year, and then she had to take 6 months off because we had a family crisis, and she was focusing on that. Now, when she applied for a job, we made sure that we had that area covered, that area of what she was doing for those 2 years. And so we put caregiver. And so we were able to cover it for the 2 years. They didn't question that at all. But what they did question was the immediate, what were you doing for the past 6 months? Because that was more like obvious. What were you doing? And they don't want to see that she was sitting at home. So I would say if you have gaps that are immediate, then that's a concern. But if you have gaps that are past, it's less of a concern. I mean, as far as if you look at my resume now, I graduated, and then all of a sudden it's just like many years of what was I doing? You can find out if you want to. My LinkedIn's up there. You can follow my LinkedIn, and you can look at it and see stuff on there. But for the most, I don't even think I updated my LinkedIn for that information. But for the most part, you are not going to really find that they're going to miss it. And if they want to ask about it, they're more than happy to. No, they're more than welcome to. What did you do in the meantime between this and this? But what they're going to find is me giving them a bunch of information that isn't relevant. Isn't relevant to the job. I was employed, and that was pretty much it. So, but those are some of the things that you should keep in mind when you're looking at a resume, when you're submitting your resume. Impact. Clear and concise as possible. You want to make it, you don't, and also eliminate redundancies. And when I say that is that I was helping some people with their resume, in everything that they had, sales, exceeded sales. I don't know why this person thought that was impressive, unless they're applying for a sales position. That this is not impressive at all. And so what I told them to do was like, and here's my thing. It's like, in order to exceed sales, you probably would have had done something different. But he didn't. And I think that was his problem. He didn't do anything different. He just had a better year. He was doing everything exactly the same. It was just a better year. And he kept doing that over and over again. And it showed absolutely nothing. It demonstrated absolutely nothing about him, just that he was the best salesman ever. But you're trying to apply for a consulting position. And so I would say, at a certain point, if you can find other ways of demonstrating skills. So, for example, if you had sales, you're not going to have something like that. But in your resume, you may have at this place you did sales, and at this place you did sales, and at this place you did sales. We probably don't need to know that you did sales 3 separate times. We can probably you can probably eliminate a couple of those sales things, because one of these bullet points just demonstrates that you probably put the most impressive one on there. That will show that you have an ability to do sales. And then you can use that space to put other skills like analyzing stuff or implementing stuff or creating strategies and stuff like that. Excuse me. So a lot of times we'll have a really long resume because we'll have redundancies. We'll keep on repeating the same skill over and over again. And so in that case, we can eliminate some of those redundancies and then show other skills that were picked up during that time at that job. Okay. Ramil just says, hey. Okay, so all right, so let me see. I'm trying to keep to time. And so let me see what was asked of me as far as like any live questions? Any live questions that we have here? Yeah. Everyone has the best resume in the world? Is that how it is? Everyone has the best resume that ever happened, ever? Okay. Well, then good. Good for you. Now, what I would say is, once again, if you plan on applying to a place like BCG, McKinsey, or Bain, timing is everything. Make sure that you know that there's positions open before you apply. Do not just apply randomly. You could have the best resume and the best cover letter in the world and apply. But if there's no open positions, you're just going to get an email that just says, sorry, no open position. And it's not going to say no open position, because that sounds bad, but instead they're just going to say we aren't really your application doesn't fit our needs right now, and that's very confusing and it's very frustrating, and so you want to avoid that. So what you want to do, and how do you know whether or not there's any open positions? I think BCG does a really good job of keeping its positions posted. However, lately I've noticed that they just kind of shut everything down, which is really strange. I have a question. Can you judge my LinkedIn and let me know if I can get a chance? Pretty fresher, by the way. Well, so your LinkedIn should be very much like your, if anything with your LinkedIn, what they would judge you is like, does your LinkedIn match your resume? Now, the nice thing about LinkedIn is LinkedIn can just go on and on and on and on and on, right? So you can put a lot of things on there that don't necessarily show up on your resume. So that's the nice thing about it. So I would say LinkedIn is great for providing additional things. And just like when you're trying to network, go to people's LinkedIn, because they'll put stuff on their LinkedIn that they don't put on that they can't put on their resume. And so it can supply you with a lot of information. Unfortunately, I wouldn't be able to look at your LinkedIn right now, but people do put their LinkedIn on there, and so it should be nice and fresh, and it should be something that's updated, because people may look at it. I'm an international grad, job hunting for 8 months, thinking of prep lounge coaching or MBB coaches legit. It's quite pricey. Thoughts? Now, MBB coaches, there's two things. There's two things about them. Hey, you know what? I was a consultant. I'm going to help you prep for cases. That's not me. That's them saying that. There are two different types of people. There are people who are like, I was a consultant, therefore I know. It's like, well, do you really know? We don't allow people to really interview people until, like, if you're an associate, you can't interview for 3 years into the job. Consultants, they can interview 1 year into the job. But do they really know how to become, or are they really good interviewers, right? Not everyone is a good interviewer. Usually people with a little bit more experience. There was one person who wanted to get money by prepping people. And I thought, yeah, you can do that. And I thought to myself, man, I remember you interviewed and you were really bad. You were really bad. And so I was kind of scared that she was going to give bad advice. I would say that if there were a former consultant, they probably have a really good idea. We like to use former interviewers, people who were actually interviewers at the firm, And those are people who are going to have a lot more experience and at least know what happens at the end of the day when you close the door, which I think is what we're going to talk about tomorrow. What happens when you close the door at the end of the day? Not tomorrow, but in 2 weeks. And it is quite pricey, yes, because these guys, they do make a lot of money now, and so their time is something that is very valuable. So that's the unfortunate part. Can it replace your resume like a digital presence? I would say, they still want that. They still want that hard copy. They still want to see the resume. I was told recently by someone who is a recruiter. She said the last thing you want to do is start saying, because there will be online applications too. Now, what are you going to say when you have to go in and fill in the online application? Are you going to say, see LinkedIn? It's not going to work, right? First thing it's going to do is it's going to ask you to download a copy of your resume. So you're going to have a copy of your resume. And then the last thing you want to do, and they hate this, recruiters hate this, put in your employment education employment, put in your employment history. And then you put in like see resume. They hate that. They absolutely hate that. So I would avoid that. They still want that hard copy, that not the hard copy, but they want to see the resume. They want to see the resume. Last question. How does one address a recent layoff on a resume due to a company downside, including, excluding, or mentioned in the cover letter? Any ideas? I would say try to make it very intentional. If you look at my resume, I was laid off like 5 times during the course of my life. And when someone asked me, hey, walk me through your resume, I said, well, first I was here and then I got laid off. And I went here and I got laid off. And I went here and I got laid off. And I'm just like, when I heard it coming out of my face, it was just like, what, am I, an idiot? And I realized at that point, it has to be very intentional. So when I was working at this one place, I realized that I really wanted to try something on my own. So I left there and I went to this other place. It sounds better, right? And then when I was there, I got another job here. And then at a certain point, I felt the need that I knew how to do this, but I wanted to learn how to do this. And that's me covering a layoff. Now, when these people contact the company that you work for, HR department, all the HR department can tell them is that you started here and you ended here. They can't say the reason why you left. They can just say you started here and you ended here. Yes, he was employed during that time. So depending on how you want to do it, you can mention it if you want to. But being laid off isn't like the worst thing in the world. It's usually due to financial situation. What you said here, company downsizing. So I don't think it's necessary to mention it because it wasn't like you were, and I wouldn't even mention it if you had done something scandalous and were leaving as well. Just have a story for intentionally why you left. I just felt as though I needed to do something different with my life. And so that's why I left. And they're not going to know unless they somehow talk to somebody who was there. And even if they talk to your manager shouldn't say anything like that either. Okay. I hope that was helpful, everyone. I'm going to try to keep in time. Yeah, intentional. I did this intentionally. I left those places 5 times intentionally. Okay. So I hope that was helpful. I hope to see you in 2 weeks. Gianna has put a bunch of LinkedIn links if in case you want to follow them to get more information. Okay. So thank you, everyone. Take care. Bye.